It's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. Coming up, Rishi Sunak comes out fighting as the Supreme Court rejects the Rwanda plan. The court ruled that the policy, which would see asylum seekers sent to Africa, is unlawful. The Prime Minister says he'll now take action to prevent any more legal challenges to his plans.
We will take the extraordinary step of introducing emergency legislation.
As Rishi Sunak sticks to his guns, I'll speak to a campaigner who challenged this Rwanda plan in the courts. Also tonight, Israeli troops inside Gaza's biggest hospital. We're live in Westminster, where tonight Labour frontbenchers have quit their jobs to join calls for a ceasefire. To mark Anti-Bullying Week, I'll be speaking to a woman whose teenage daughter took her own life after she was targeted in group messages. And we'll get the latest from Bristol, where the mayor has revealed that an evacuated tower block home to 400 people may not have been properly constructed. All that and more to come on the UK Tonight. Well, we're going to go straight to Westminster at the top of the programme. MPs on both sides of the House of Commons tonight have defied their party leadership to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. Labour and the SNP both tabled amendments to the King's speech. Labour called for a pause in the fighting, the SNP calling for a full ceasefire. Both amendments defeated, but 56 Labour MPs went against their leader's wishes, Sir Keir Starmer's wishes, and backed calls for that ceasefire. Well, members of his front bench have resigned. Others are now facing the sack. We understand that 56 MPs in total, 56 Labour MPs in total backed the SNP's amendment. Let's speak to our chief political correspondent, John Craig, who is in Westminster, because some of those MPs have already walked before they're pushed.
They have indeed, yes. What's happened tonight in the past half hour or so is that there have been two key votes in Parliament. First, MPs voted on the Labour amendment to the King's speech motion, and that was calling actually for the daily humanitarian pauses to be made longer to deliver humanitarian assistance, and it's a necessary step, the Labour motion said, to an enduring cessation of fighting as soon as possible. Now, the numbers there were 183 in favour, 290 against. But then we had the real drama when it came to the vote on an SNP amendment, which said it calls on the government to join with the international community in urgently pressing all parties to agree to an immediate ceasefire. There, the numbers were 125 in favour, 293 against. And indeed, there were 56 Labour MPs voting for that motion, that amendment. Now, the key thing is that Labour MPs had been instructed by Sir Keir Starmer not to vote for the SNP amendment because he wanted Labour MPs to back his motion. Well, after the vote, the Labour leadership told Sky News that any frontbencher, including parliamentary private secretaries, that's bag carriers, I suppose you'd call them, who vote contrary to the frontbench position, are considered by convention to have resigned their position. Now, the numbers we have who have indeed done that were 9 shadow ministers. I'll name them. Imran Hussain, who quit last week, Paula Barker, Rachel Hopkins, Afzal Khan, Sarah Owen, Jess Phillips, by far the most high profile of those resignations, Yasmin Qureshi, Naz Shah and Andy Slaughter. The two PPSs were Dan Carden and Mary Foy. Now, in a statement, Sir Keir Starmer said this. He said that he regretted the decisions taken by those MPs, and he said, here, I've got the statement here. He said, I regret that some colleagues felt unable to support the position tonight, but I wanted to be clear about where I stood and where I will stand. Leadership is about doing the right thing. That is the least the public deserves and the least that leadership demands. Well, let me read to you a little bit of the letter from Jess Phillips when she quit. She said, This is her letter to Keir Starmer. This week's been one of the toughest weeks in politics since I entered Parliament. I've tried to do everything I could to make it so this was not the outcome, but it's with a heavy heart that I'll be leaving my post in the Shadow Home Office team. She was spokesman on domestic abuse and safeguarding. She says, on this occasion, I must vote with my constituents. She's MP for Birmingham Yardley. My head and my heart, which has felt as if it were breaking over the last 4 weeks with the horror of the situation in Israel and Palestine. I can see no route where the current military action does anything but put at risk the hope of peace and security for anyone in the region now and in the future. So quite an emotional letter from Jess Phillips resigning there. And there are also letters from Yasmin Qureshi, talks about demanding an immediate ceasefire, and other MPs like Afzal Khan, and one Paula Barker, who said, my office has been overwhelmed with correspondence on the matter. So a lot of pressure on MPs from their constituents, and as a number of them have quit tonight or been sacked, if you like. The Labour leadership is telling Sky News they've basically sacked themselves. The Labour leadership, the Sir Keir, will perhaps be relieved. There's no members of the shadow cabinet, the top team, but a number of more junior spokespeople, including one very high-profile rebel, that is Jess Phillips.
OK, John, thank you. John Craig in Westminster. As there are more developments on this story, we'll bring them to you. John will pop up later in the programme, I am sure. Well, anti-war protesters have been gathering outside Parliament tonight to support calls inside for a ceasefire. Sky's Ivor Bennett is at that protest for us in Westminster. Ivor.
Yeah, so the protest, what remains of it, has actually moved from Parliament. We're now on Whitehall, nearing Downing Street, with the protesters who remain walking up Whitehall to Trafalgar Square. Ever since news of that SNP ceasefire amendment being defeated came through, news that was met with chants of shame on you outside Parliament, numbers have been rapidly diminishing, and the police are keen to clear the street outside Parliament. A couple of hundred protesters remain, as I say, making their way up Whitehall. At its peak, though, this 3-hour protest outside Parliament, there was between 1,000 and 1,500 outside Parliament taking over the road there, making themselves as loud as possible, chanting things like ceasefire now, waving Palestinian flags, holding placards saying the words Free Palestine. And the aim was to put as much pressure as possible on the MPs inside Parliament, trying to get MPs of all parties to back a ceasefire. In their view, demonstrators' view, it's a simple moral test, a question of whether you want to see the killing of civilians and children in Gaza end. And so they're calling on MPs to examine their conscience, they said. A humanitarian pause, in their view, doesn't go far enough. Because they think any good that's done by it will simply be undone when the bombing resumes. So here they are outside Downing Street now, chanting shame on you. They didn't achieve their aim of MPs backing a ceasefire, and now they're making their dislike heard right outside the gates of Downing Street.
OK, Ivor, thank you, Ivor Bennett, at that protest in Westminster for us tonight. Now, the other huge story in Westminster, Rishi Sunak saying that he is delivering on his promise to stop the boats and saying he won't give up after the Supreme Court rejected the government's plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. Now, the UK's highest court said the plan is unlawful because there is a risk that asylum seekers could be forced back to their country of origin after arriving in the African country. Labour called on the Prime Minister to apologise to the nation for wasting taxpayers' money. But Mr Sunak today doubled down, promising new laws to prevent any further legal challenges to his plans and promising flights will take off come the spring. Our political editor Beth Rigby has this report.
Refugee rights are human rights.
This a landmark moment at Britain's highest court for those who would make Britain their home.
Rwanda is unsafe. Rwanda is unsafe.
And a government that's made immigration the cornerstone of its mandate. The Supreme Court ruling then a body blow for Rishi Sunak. Judges unanimous, the Rwanda deportation plan unlawful.
The Home Secretary's appeal is therefore dismissed.
The size of the media scrum reflecting the magnitude of the moment for both sides. The government had been managing expectations, but with the stakes so high, the victor's relief palpable. Were you always confident that you were going to win this case?
No.
You weren't? Why not?
We were always confident that we had a very strong case and we put it to the courts properly, but you can never be confident in a case like this.
And the government now has a huge problem. Their flagship immigration policy grounded, questions now over where to go next. There is a big movement within the Conservative Party that the solution to this is to withdraw from the ECHR. What's your view of that?
It would be a damning indictment on this country were we to join Russia, Belarus in withdrawing from the European Convention on Human Rights.
Has your plan failed, Prime Minister?
The judgment delivered, the Prime Minister to Parliament to face the music.
He promised that he would stop the boats this year. Yeah. This year. Today is the 15th of November. He's wasted all of his time on a gimmick, and now he's absolutely nowhere.
The new Home Secretary cleared the government will push on with the Rwanda plan, but there was pushback too. James Cleverly suggesting the government will now rewrite legislation to try again.
The Prime Minister has said that if our domestic legal framework frustrates our plans, he is prepared to change our laws. But I will inform the House we are not going to put forward proposals simply to manufacture an unnecessary row for political gain.
But for some on the Conservative benches, that row no laughing matter. And for the PM, another headache. MPs warning he has to get this policy working or face the consequences. It's the next Tory civil war, isn't it, Simon?
Well, I hope not, because I believe that the Prime Minister will respond with appropriate firmness. Certainly it is a vital question of his leadership that he does.
OK, but if he doesn't, then it is a civil war, because you guys will go to war with him over it.
I hope we don't need to, Beth.
A PM warned, and by the afternoon he was ready to present the details of his new plan.
We will take the extraordinary step of introducing emergency legislation. This will enable Parliament to confirm that with our new treaty, Rwanda is safe. It will ensure that people cannot further delay flights by bringing systemic challenges in our domestic courts and stop our policy being repeatedly blocked.
His day in court, and the Prime Minister really needed a win. Instead, the linchpin of his immigration policy now not just loose, but lost. The Prime Minister insists that he will pass new laws through Parliament and flights will get off the ground next spring. But even as he said it, allies of Suella Braverman told me that this was more magical thinking. A Prime Minister doubling down, only to rinse and repeat. Another torrid day for Rishi Sunak's government, straight off the back of a divisive reshuffle. And this latest attempt to keep a key promise to voters, for now, raising far more questions than it answers. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Westminster.
Well, for asylum seekers here in the UK, there is a sense of relief following today's ruling by the Supreme Court. But in towns and cities hosting refugees, the decision was met with frustration in some quarters. Our communities correspondent Becky Johnson reports from one town left divided by today's ruling.
The Home Secretary's appeal is therefore dismissed.
For these asylum seekers, it wasn't political, it was personal. A decision that may determine their futures. It's the ruling everyone staying in their migrant hotel in Staffordshire had been hoping for.
No Rwanda anymore.
I'm very happy because we don't go to Rwanda, we like England.
Mohammed, who's from Syria, shows me this.
England.
It's from the small boat he crossed the channel in this August. He made the dangerous journey even though he knew he could have ended up in Rwanda.
We couldn't give up and we couldn't just go back. We have tried our best to just come in the United Kingdom, even so if they send us to Rwanda.
If the court had ruled differently and said, yes, asylum seekers can go to Rwanda, Would that have stopped people coming over in small boats?
Rwanda, I don't think this will have stopped people, because the people are fleeing not because of Rwanda or scared of Rwanda. They're scared of their life, of the safety and what's going on in these countries in the Middle East.
But in a nearby cafe, we found frustration with the judge's ruling.
People who work in the courts have got money. They're okay with their lives. What they don't understand is there's people really, really desperate for homes and they can't afford to live, basically. And we're giving all our money to the asylum seekers.
We've got that many people here and we're looking after them, but we're not looking after our own.
I know in some countries it's hard for them. I really do understand that. And it is a shame, but we need to look after our own backyard first.
These are the people the Prime Minister hopes will support him as he tries to find a way to make it work. Becky Johnson, Sky News, Staffordshire.
Well, it's been quite a day. Let's get reaction now from the campaigners that brought the legal challenge to the Rwanda plan, which Rishi Sunak insists that he is going to pursue. I'm joined in the studio by James Wilson. He is Director of Detention Action. James, good to see you. It's probably worth talking through your reaction as the day went on, because I would imagine when the court's ruling came out, there was a huge sigh of relief from your organisation.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Absolutely. So our first reaction, Dave, was enormous relief, happiness at this decision. We work with people every day held in immigration detention. As you say, we were one of the lead claimants in the initial stages of this challenge. We're hugely proud that no one has yet been removed to Rwanda and that the immediate risk of removals to Rwanda has been stopped today. Well, the immediate risk has been parked, but the risk still remains, because I wonder what you made of the Prime Minister's speech earlier this evening, where he doubled down on the plans to Rwanda, essentially saying, you know, we will change the law if we have to. We're going to make this work. The court didn't rule that sending people to another country was illegal. So once we've satisfied the UK Supreme Court, we'll go again. What was your reaction to that? Well, it's very disappointing. We absolutely would call on the government to rethink that and to abandon this policy at this point. I think a few things. Firstly, I'm not a lawyer, but in terms of the emergency legislation that the Prime Minister has referred to, I'm not sure that the government can do that without withdrawing from a number of international treaties, not just the ECHR, and indeed potentially abandoning a number of domestic immigration legislation. So I'm not sure how practical that is to start with. Secondly, I think it's really important to come back to a point about lawfulness not being enough. Lawfulness for a new government policy should be the lowest bar. But there are other things that a government policy should be. They should also be wise, they should be workable, they should be humane and reasonable. And the Rwanda scheme is none of those things. I think, thirdly, there's a fundamental point that even goes beyond Rwanda in particular as a destination country, which is the government should be processing every claim for asylum to the UK in the UK, fully and fairly, not sending people to Rwanda or indeed any other third country or territory. Is it Rwanda in particular you have a problem with? Because there was a YouGov poll conducted after this decision was made. 39% of those polled in the UK said the government should scrap this policy. 29% said they should pursue a similar agreement with a different country. Your organisation, is it looking at Rwanda as an unsafe country, but perhaps you would be open to another country? Because, as Rishi Sunak was saying before, this kind of agreement between countries operates in other parts of Europe and elsewhere. No, I mean, clearly the decision today was about, was the Supreme Court held very serious concerns about the safety of people if sent to Rwanda. I think it's important to distinguish between the country, because this isn't about being anti the country of Rwanda, but serious concerns about its government and in particular its asylum system. That was central to the legal decision today. But no, our opposition is much wider than that. Again, we should be processing every claim for asylum to the UK in the UK. So there is no agreement with a third country which we would welcome. I think it's really important to talk about the people affected by the decision, because for every slogan, stop the boats, you know, for every, you know, figure quoted about the number of boats and people coming over, there are real people involved here, and you talk to them on a daily basis. What's this been like for those who were potentially earmarked to be on that first flight to Rwanda? Some of them, you know, pulled off the plane on the tarmac. What has that been like for them with this hanging over their head? It's been devastating. I mean, we speak to people every day in immigration detention. Our initial involvement in the case was because we had clients in detention who were threatened with potential removal. There aren't, I think, official figures on how many people have had notices of intent, have been specifically threatened they might be removed, but estimates are that it's around 30,000 people, huge numbers of people, huge uncertainty for those people and also people more generally in the asylum and detention system, alongside everything else that they are dealing with. So it's been huge. As you say, it's absolutely crucial we come back to the human level here. Remember, these are human beings. We also want to see an end to the need for dangerous journeys across the Channel. But we think that the way ahead with that is to introduce safe routes. No one would undertake such dangerous journeys unless they felt they had no choice but to do so. If you introduced safe routes, you would quickly end the need for those journeys and ensure that people are safe while their asylum claims are considered.
OK, James Wilson, Director of Detention Action, thank you for now. Rishi Sunak very much sticking with Plan A. I'm sure we will talk again as this rumbles on. Thank you so much for joining us on the UK Tonight. Now, to events in the Middle East. The Israeli military says it has found a Hamas command centre under Gaza's biggest hospital. IDF troops entered the Al-Shifa hospital last night for what it called a targeted operation. Tonight, Hamas has described claims that weapons are being stored under the hospital as a blatant lie. The Al-Shifa hospital in northern Gaza has found the war closing in around it as Israeli forces continue to advance further into the enclave. Let's hear from our International Affairs editor, Dominic Wackhall.
Israel has long claimed Al-Shifa is a Hamas headquarters as well as a hospital, but this is the first time it's sent tanks and troops in to raid it. It said it was acting against Hamas, but has only released footage showing troops delivering medical aid. Away from here, Palestinians say the Israelis opened fire inside the hospital complex and damaged parts of its buildings with explosions. Meeting troops near Gaza, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was making no apologies for sending troops and tanks into a hospital.
We were told that we would not reach the outskirts of Gaza City. We arrived. We were told that we won't enter Shifa. We entered. And in this spirit, we say a simple thing. There is no place in Gaza that we will not reach.
Palestinians say Al-Shifa has already been attacked in recent days, claiming this was the damage. Israelis deny that, saying there was no fighting inside its compound today. Humanitarian groups are condemning the operation. The World Health Organization says it was unjustified.
Israel's military incursion into Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza City is totally unacceptable. Hospitals are not battlegrounds. We're extremely worried for the safety of staff and patients. Protecting them is paramount. WHO has lost contact with health workers at Al-Shifa Hospital.
During this war, Al-Shifa has become a symbol of Palestinian resilience, a sanctuary for thousands from Israel's bombardment, where doctors have battled the odds to save many lives. But Israel says it has a dark side too, harbouring Hamas fighters and facilities. Israeli forces have also attacked another hospital further north, claiming to find weapons and explosives both there and in Al-Shifa. Hamas denies using either hospital for military reasons. Gaza's hospitals have all suffered. Last month, many died in a blast at the Al-Ali hospital. The IDF says this raid is within a specified area of the sprawling complex at Al-Shifa. It's called on all Hamas members within the hospital to immediately surrender. We've been trying to phone doctors at Al-Shifa all day, but they've been impossible to reach. Palestinian health authorities on the West Bank have condemned the operation as a crime. Under the rules of armed conflict, Israelis must present convincing evidence the site was being used for military reasons to justify moving in on a hospital. The Israeli government insists it's doing what it can to protect civilians and help patients at Al-Shifa, delivering some aid. But aid organisations say it isn't nearly enough. What is needed is a pause in fighting, lasting days, to let in desperately needed help. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News, Jerusalem.
Meanwhile, the Israeli military has taken Sky News into northern Gaza. Here's our correspondent Mark Stone. His reporting, we should tell you, is subject to Israeli military restrictions.
Well, we're about 2 or 3 kilometres south of the Shifa hospital here, just on the outskirts of Gaza City. And the Israeli military have brought us to an evacuation zone. And if we move up here, I'll show you what it looks like. It's pretty extraordinary to see. As we move up, you can see over this berm here, quite a few Palestinians. There were many more here a little bit earlier on. They're waiting. There are loudspeakers that are calling out to them in Arabic and telling them that this is a safe corridor, that they can move out. The fighting in this particular area has been paused from the Israeli side to allow people to move. But as you can see, the person right at the front there in a wheelchair, extraordinarily difficult for them. On the face of it, this is good news in the sense that they are being allowed to move to safety. But you know, as we've been saying before, so many problems because the south is not safe either. They are being targeted in the south. There have been airstrikes in Khan Yunis in the south as well. And of course, for the Palestinian psyche, this is very, very difficult indeed. Look at the landscape behind. They don't believe they will ever be able to return to those homes. They believe that this is a forced displacement of the Palestinian people of Gaza.
And you can see Mark's full report from inside Gaza at 9 o'clock tonight. Still to come on the UK tonight, Olivia Pratt-Corbell's killer asks to appeal against his jail sentence. Also ahead, climate activist Greta Thunberg appears at a London court charged with a public order offence. And a big boost for the UK economy thanks to the Barbie movie.
Has rallied. Moderation interest rates peaking
up at 6%.
The highest for 14 years.
Will that be the peak? Will it be a little bit lower?
Prices. It's closer to a potential crash.
So many words, so many meanings. But what do they mean for you and your finances? Stay up to date on Sky News.
They have breached the road. There is a lot of gas being fired all around us. It is an absolute carnival kind of atmosphere out here for Prime Minister Modi's decisive victory. These students are defying the prohibitory order and now they're going to be arrested. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. The roads have been inundated. The only way out is to get people by boat. This on any given day would have been bustling with people, but today it's absolutely deserted. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Welcome back. You're watching the UK Tonight. Here's what's coming up. We'll return to Westminster for the latest from John Craig as 8 Labour frontbenchers resign tonight to vote in favour of a ceasefire in Gaza. And we'll have the latest from Bristol, where hundreds of residents were told to leave a tower block yesterday after structural problems were discovered. Right now, though, let's take a look at some of the other stories making news in the UK tonight. And the drug dealer who shot dead 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell has asked to appeal against his 42-year minimum jail term. 35-year-old Thomas Cashman was jailed for life for shooting Olivia dead at her home in Govt in Liverpool in August last year. His written application for permission to challenge his minimum jail term was rejected by a judge without a hearing earlier this year. A lawyer representing him has now renewed that application at a Court of Appeal hearing in London. Well, Olivia was killed after Cashman opened fire as he chased a fellow drug dealer into her home. He was given a mandatory life sentence after being convicted of her murder. Greta Thunberg has pleaded not guilty to a public order offence in London. The environmental campaigner was arrested back in October while protesting outside an oil and gas industry conference in Mayfair. She appeared at court today alongside several other activists charged with the same offence. If found guilty, Greta Thunberg could face a fine of up to £2,500. The Barbie movie apparently contributed more than £80 million to the UK economy during filming. Warner Brothers says the production created 685 jobs, involved more than 6,000 extras and paid more than £40 million in local wages. Directed by Greta Gerwig, the film was largely shot at the Warner Brothers studios in Hertfordshire. The Mayor of Bristol says a tower block in the city, which was evacuated last night, may not have been built to the right specification. More than 400 residents were told to leave Barton House immediately yesterday, with the council declaring a major incident. Sky's Lisa Dowd reports from Bristol.
People who live in this block of flats don't know if they'll ever call them home again. On Tuesday night, without warning, Bristol City Council declared a major incident here and told 400 residents at Barton House that they had to get out.
At the moment, they said it's a couple of days, but what will be later? But it's my belief is no one is coming back in this building. Once you go, you go.
Some returned and grabbed what they could.
It's your home, not anymore. So you just got to find one now. So where am I going to sleep later? I've got no idea.
A survey uncovered significant problems in 3 of the 98 flats. It showed that if there was a fire or an explosion, it could be catastrophic for the structure of the building.
I used to live in this building, as it happens, and that makes it particularly poignant, emotional for me, because I really lived those people's lives. So this is our oldest tower block, and it was built in a specific way by a specific builder. So we're reasonably confident. We have no evidence of any issues in any other building in the city, so we're comfortable that this is the one with which we have a problem.
Residents were evacuated as a precaution, and further surveys will need to be done. All of the people who called this place home are now wondering just how much danger they were living in and for how long. The reality is none of them know whether they'll ever be able to come back. Some are staying with friends and family. Others are in hotels. How's everybody feeling here?
Worrying. They're worrying and they don't know what will happen. Uncertainty. They don't have any certainty. So there's a lot of issues happening in the area. And when you see the building now, it's like a ghost house, something like that. And even some of them, they say, so we don't want to go back.
The issue here is not rack concrete, as we've seen condemned in other buildings, but a particular problem with how the concrete sections are tied to the supporting walls. It's thought to be the only building in Bristol with the issue, but that's no consolation for the hundreds of people who've been displaced. Lisa Dowd, Sky News, Bristol.
Still to come on the UK tonight on Anti-Bullying Week. I'll be speaking to a woman whose teenage daughter took her own life after she was targeted by other children. Welcome back to the UK tonight on a busy night in Westminster. Let's return to our chief political correspondent, John Craig, who's across everything that's happening. John, what's the latest?
Well, the latest, actually, is a statement from Grant Shapps, the Defence Secretary, who has responded to the votes in Parliament tonight. He says that voting for a ceasefire is essentially voting to give Hamas the green light to commit further terrorist atrocities. If Britain had been attacked on October the 7th, if Britain had been attacked and we knew exactly where the murderers were, would any MP seriously be voting not to go after them? He says Israel must target Hamas proportionally and within international humanitarian law to protect civilians, de-escalate tensions in the West Bank and go ahead with meaningful humanitarian pauses to ensure aid is distributed. But Israel has the right to defend itself, he said. Now, what's happened tonight, Sarah-Jane, is that there have been two key votes at the end of the long debate on the King's speech. The Labour amendment was defeated by 290 to 183. Then we had the SNP amendment demanding a call for a ceasefire from the UK government, defeated by 293 to 125. That's a big number, 125 for an SNP amendment. 56 Labour MPs voted with the SNP. Now, crucially, among them were a dozen or so Frontbenchers, members of Sir Keir Starmer's team. They have now been sacked, or according to the Labour leadership, have automatically resigned from their posts. They were, first of all, Imran Hussain, who quit last week. Secondly, Paula Barker, Rachel Hopkins, Afzal Khan, Sarah Owen, Jess Phillips, the most high-profile rebel, Yasmin Qureshi, Naz Shah, Andy Slaughter, and two PPS's, Dan Carden and Mary Foy. Now, we spoke to a short time ago in the Politics Hub programme with Sophie Ridge to Naz Shah, one of those rebels, who explained why she had voted and defied the leadership and backed the ceasefire motion.
I choose to take the evidence, make that informed choice from what NGOs are saying, Save the Children, Medical Aid for Palestinian, Oxfam, all these people who are on the ground. And usually we would be led by what they are saying. So why are we not doing that on this occasion? I think for me personally, that was a decision I had to take with the evidence available to me, and that is a call for an immediate ceasefire. And it's not about, in opposition, it's not whether Rishi Sunak is going to listen to me when I'm making the case for my constituents in Bradford West, but that does not stop me from making the case to do the right thing.
Well, among the number of frontbenchers who've quit by resigning, there's this letter, very emotional letter from Jess Phillips to Sir Keir, in which she talks about a heavy heart, and she says, "On this occasion, I must vote with my constituents, my head and my heart, which has felt as if it were breaking over the last 4 weeks with the horror of the situation in Israel and Palestine." Similar letters from other frontbenchers who've quit. Sir Keir is defiant, however. He said he regrets the rebellion, but he is insisting that his stance is the right one and that a ceasefire is not the right option.
John, thank you. John Craig with the latest from Westminster. Much more to come throughout the night here on Sky News. Now, the mother of a teenage girl who took her own life after she was targeted in group messages has called for more education on the deadly consequences that bullying can have. This week, millions of children in England, Wales and Northern Ireland are taking part in activities to mark Anti-Bullying Week and being asked to consider what bullying means to them and how banter can turn into something more hurtful. Honey Cook was just 15 when she died, and it wasn't until police checked her phone that anyone knew what she had gone through. I sat down with Honey's mum, Gemma, and asked her to talk me through what happened.
We had this tea the night before and she'd gone to bed, absolutely fine. I'd carried on working downstairs, and then the day after, I'd gone up to get the girls up, so we're going to have us dinner at Valentine's Day, and I kept shouting her name and she didn't answer, and I went to her room and she'd taken her own life during the night. When the police got involved, obviously, and they came back to us with her phone, it had shown that she had been bullied and told to take her own life several times by various people in this group chat.
So that's how you found out that Honey was being bullied? You had no idea? She had not said to you that she was struggling or being targeted by bullies online? No. You found out because police, as part of the investigation, took her phone?
Yeah, I had absolutely no idea why she'd done it at all. It completely knocked wind out of my sails. I weren't seeing it coming at all.
So you had her phone and you had access to those messages, what she was having to read on a daily basis. How did it make you feel?
It was really upsetting. The things that these girls were saying were so nasty and evil that I have never heard adults say anything like that. To think that Honey, she was 6 weeks away from being 16, had to deal with that while going through her GCSEs and everything else. It's just horrific, it really is.
At the time, you were training to be a mental health nurse. You say that Honey was like your mini-me. You were close. You were close to your daughter.
Yeah, very close.
So if that could happen without you knowing, I think that's a warning alarm for a lot of parents who think that they have a good relationship with their child, think that they support them, they're from a loving home. But this can happen because children, you know, from 11 onwards, some younger, have a mobile phone in their hands, particularly secondary school children, they all have them.
Yeah.
And if you don't have access to that, you just don't know.
I carry a guilt with me now that I didn't know that that was happening. And I look back at little cues thinking, oh, this could have been that, but there were nothing, there were absolutely nothing. And like I said, we were really close. She could tell me anything. We had his own little, we had like the same sense of humour, his own little language and stuff for each other. And she didn't explain why, there were no note. It's just completely, she didn't want to tell me, but she'd tell me anything, and it just didn't make sense for a long time. But there's questions there that I'm never going to get answers for.
There is a lot going on online, bullying, and comments like, just go and kill yourself, is said flippantly by children. When written down, that can be even worse in a message. Do you think there is a case for talking to children, younger children, about suicide in a way that's educational to make them realise the harm of saying things like that? Oh,
yeah, definitely. Definitely. If we're talking about mental health a lot, then the worst case scenario from mental health conditions is suicide. They've got to know the start to finish. It's all right saying to these kids, you need to sleep more and eat well and exercise and you'll be okay. We need to say, like, this is what could happen. If not, if you tell that little girl that you don't like it, you hate, blah, 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 then this could happen. Like, it needs to be
part of the mental health conversation for young people. You're also offering support to people. You're doing work in Honey's name. Your organisation, Be Kind for Honey, and you talk to young people about bullying and mental health. In fact, you've created a journal that you help people with. It sort of asks young people to document their feelings, and all of that money goes back to the cause, of course, after covering your costs, because you want children to be talking openly and to learn about, it's not just a hashtag, be kind. It's just something they should be doing on a day-to-day basis. What do you want to achieve through your work for Be Kind for Honey?
I would love for, like, young people to be able to talk openly with the parents if they're not feeling good, to not be worried that they're going to be judged, for them to have somebody that they can confide in at school, because there needs to be a lot of work done in schools around it as well. And if I can stop one child from doing what Honey did, then all this work that I've been doing for the last couple of years is 100% worth it.
Well, thank you to Gemma for sharing her family story. I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation afterwards, and of course about Honey. To her family, her mum and younger siblings in particular, Honey is everything. But the fact is that she is one of around 200 teens who take their own lives every year. And that's 200 families with a lifetime of unimaginable hurt. Unimaginable if we are lucky. A story like this is always a reminder to check in with your kids, even if everything seems okay, seems good, great, in fact. It also made me think that the uncomfortable silence, not just around suicide, but importantly, suicide prevention, has to end. Because, as we've just heard, the effects are utterly devastating, not just for those young lives, but for those they love who are left behind. A point that Gemma made in our conversation brilliantly. She did honey proud tonight. And if you've been affected by anything in that conversation, you can call the Samaritans. 116 123 is the number, or email joe@samaritans.org.
It's fantastic news, and I think that paediatricians up and down the country will be delighted to hear that this vaccine has now been recommended for inclusion in the schedule. So what happened when they looked initially at the modelling data about the cost effectiveness of including the vaccine, what they looked at was the relationship between chickenpox and shingles. So when you get chickenpox, the virus hides in your nerve endings and can come out later as shingles. And managing shingles can be very expensive. It's a very unpleasant condition. So the idea was that having lots of chickenpox in the community would boost older people's immunity and then stop them from getting shingles. Now, what happened actually with 25 years worth of data from the US, where they've now had the vaccine in the routine schedule, that increase in shingles just hasn't happened. So I think that is then fed into the committee's decision to recommend this vaccine, which I'm certainly delighted about. Yes, so those very severe complications of chickenpox, they do happen. So severe inflammation of the lungs, severe inflammation of the brain, even having a stroke. Those are very unusual, very rare, though they do happen. More common complications are secondary bacterial infections of the skin. So particularly when you've been scratching a spot, you can get nasty bacterial infections. So we worry a lot about one called Group A streptococcus. And that can be unpleasant, painful, and really quite dangerous. And children ending up to need to take courses of antibiotics. But I'd say that even that mild disease can be miserable for children. And again, there's good evidence to show that actually that's really quite unpleasant. And I think most parents would be able to say their children had a miserable time of it. So again, being able to prevent children having that is really great. So on a personal level, I've had my son vaccinated for chickenpox. And I would, again, on a personal level, recommend to my friends and family that they would purchase the vaccine. That can be difficult for people who it's unaffordable or unavailable for. So again, I think this is great news that we're moving to a place of more equity where that vaccine will hopefully be available soon on the NHS. Oh, I'm sorry, my sympathy. I know that it's a miserable disease.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that, again, the thing to be careful about is if they look like they're starting getting better and then start having temperatures again, check their spots, make sure there isn't any spread of inflammation around the spots, because you just have to keep an eye out for that secondary bacterial infection.
Welcome back. Some breaking news for you from the UN Security Council. They have called for urgent extended pauses in fighting throughout Gaza for a sufficient number of days to allow aid access. That's coming from the UN Security Council tonight. They've also called for immediate and unconditional release of all hostages held by Hamas and other groups. So that's the UN Security Council calling for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages held by Hamas and other groups, and also calling for urgent extended pauses in fighting throughout Gaza for a sufficient number of days to allow aid into Gaza. We'll have more on that as we get it. But right now, let's take a look at the sport.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
Caroline Dubois, the new world champion. Caroline is going to take us through some of the women who really inspired her through her career so far. So Caroline, go and have a look.
Yep, let's go.
Caroline, Clarissa was not surprised when we were speaking before about who you were going to choose. Just tell me a little bit why you've chosen her.
I started boxing when I was 9, and I didn't have many role models. I didn't have many female boxers that I looked up to, admired, or even felt on a level where I could understand them, and they could be someone that experiences are similar to mine, and I remember going up into squads and I was the only black girl there, and I just felt very insecure about how I looked, who I was. I was insecure about my muscles, how big I was compared to all the other girls, and I was insecure about so many silly little things, really, now that I look at it. But at the time, when you're 11, you're 12, you're 15, you know, that stuff that gets you. And being able to see Clarissa Shields, I remember seeing her, and she was so big, so strong, so good. I remember being insecure about the fact that I was winning all the time. And then I seen Clarissa Shields, and she never lost. She only ever lost one fight. She went to every tournament, dominated. And I was like, it's okay to be me. She wasn't afraid to tell people that she was the best. She wasn't afraid to say, okay, I'll walk into the room. You had the respect for me, and that's what I needed. Obviously, I'm not Clarissa Shields, and I'm not going to try and emulate her, but I'm just going to try and emulate myself and be more confident in yourself. And I realized that, you know, sometimes the hardest thing in the world is to be yourself, and having people that are themselves gives you the confidence that you can do that too.
Even having someone who looked like you, how important was that, especially in the sport that you did? You have that necessarily in person when you were sort of training and getting up in the game?
Everyone used to think I was a boy. I walk into the gym and they'd be like, oh, that's that boy, he's over there. And at the time, it didn't matter to me. But as I got older and I started to get 16 and, you know, 17 and...
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Right, let's take a quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
It's going to stay unsettled through the weekend, I'm afraid. Spells of wind and rain followed by more showery days. Northern England and central and southern Scotland will see showery outbreaks easing this evening, leaving most places fine, but the southwest will see rain. That rain spreading across southern parts of Britain and Ireland overnight, with strong winds developing near the Channel.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Now, we always like to leave you with something weird and wonderful from around the UK. And tonight we want to tell you all about an urban fox who became something of a local celebrity. Now, the fox was first spotted by locals in Gosport around 3 weeks ago with a plastic tube stuck around its neck. You can see it here. Rescuers eventually managed to capture the fox, remove the plastic and treat her wounds. And the fox, who has been named Faith by her rescuers, is now recovering well. Joining me, Steve Mason, one of those rescuers, founder of Second Chance Fox Rescue and Rehabilitation. As you can see, Faith is with him as well, looking far more comfortable than she did in those photos. Steve, talk to me about how you went about finding her and treating her.
We were first notified about her, it's about 2.5 weeks ago now. A lady saw her in a communal garden in Gosport from her apartment window with what she thought was a plastic pipe around her neck. We sent out one of our volunteers, Deborah, who tried to catch the fox without any success. So we set a trap for her, a humane fox trap. Unfortunately, the fox was a bit wily and wasn't interested in the trap. We had many more sightings. Traps were moved. 2 traps were set. She didn't like the trap at all. Eventually, we asked members of the public around there if they could let us know of any sightings. And we did manage to see her ourselves. And we eventually caught her in a net, a large net.
I was going to say, who thought a clever fox, but, you know, the traditional net. And this tube was around her neck for around 2 weeks, you think, and we can see from the photos it was really cutting into her. We've only got about a minute or so left. How much of this do you see with urban foxes? Because, of course, they're everywhere now, and they do get into tight spots like this.
They are, unfortunately, but it's not their fault. Where we're taking their land away, where else can they go? This is the plight of the fox. Hence, they become urbanised. We see a lot of it in netting, fences. The poor foxes are very hungry. They need help. And they sniff around urban areas, which is where they go. And we think Faith saw something at the end of a tube, which was discarded, put her head in, and obviously got it stuck. And she was at least 2 weeks that we know of with it on her head, and it caused a lot of damage, as you can see by the photo
Yeah, we can see from the photos, but Steve, we can see her behind you recovering well. We know that you hope that she'll be ready to release in a couple of weeks' time, and you're planning to celebrate with a bottle of champers and pizza when she is released. Thank you so much for talking to us on the UK Tonight. Best wishes to you and, of course, to Faith.